The shimmering boundary. Life is sometimes a series of difficult choices, especially when a young person stands at the delicate boundary between what is right and what is forbidden. This story is about Ethan, a lonely young man in a quiet American suburban town, and Evelyn, his older neighbor, possessing a weathered yet alluring beauty. It is a journey into silent yearning, irresistible temptation, and the unavoidable consequences of crossing the line of moral conduct and ethics. It serves as a reminder that, in the quest for love, understanding, and filling the void in one's soul, one must be cautious of the turns that can lead to self-destruction and harm to those around them. The story content, full 100% English translation. When she saw me, Evelyn smiled softly. That smile was very gentle, but in her eyes I saw something different. There was something inviting, something urging me on. It wasn't the usual concern of a neighbor. There was something implicit, an inquiry, a concern that exceeded boundaries. That invitation, accompanied by a fond look, made me feel a slight electric current run down my spine. My hesitation rose, shyness tried to stop me, but at the same time, an intense curiosity, a secret yearning, was gradually awakening. It pushed me to step across that boundary, the boundary of 1,000-star pleasure, of surging, stolen sensations. I held her tight, my hand slipping inside. I trembled, half wanting to stop, half consumed by a burning desire. I was drawn into an invisible vortex where reason and emotion clashed fiercely. This small house left by my parents was now my only refuge in the vastness of youth. I had just turned 22, the age people call taking the first steps in life, but I felt lost at sea. My parents were gone, leaving me alone in this small town, a peaceful suburb in New York where life flowed slowly and steadily, like its own breath. The job at the mechanic shop brought little excitement. It was mostly repetitive days. The smell of machine oil and the sound of clanking metal had become too familiar. I lived lonely between cold walls, with only the chirping of crickets at night as my companion. Evelyn, my next-door neighbor, was a woman I'd known since childhood. She was nearly 20 years older than me, a woman past middle age with hair starting to silver at the temples and eyes holding untold stories. Her husband, James, was a reserved man, busy all day with his job as a long-haul truck driver or absorbed in old newspapers. Rarely did I see him show Evelyn special attention, or perhaps that attention had become so familiar it was invisible. Their house always had an air of stillness. Sometimes I wondered if Evelyn felt lonely in her own home. My life went on, monotonous and unremarkable, until one chilly autumn afternoon. That cold didn't just come from the weather, it crept deep into my soul. I was sitting on the porch looking out at the familiar village road when I saw Evelyn watering plants in the garden. She wore a jade green silk dress, the color as gentle as her own personality. When she saw me, she gently smiled. That smile was very gentle, but in her eyes I saw something unusual. There was something inviting, something urging me on. "Ethan," her voice echoed, gentle as the soft ringing of a wind chime. "It's starting to get chilly. A lean young man like you, not eating enough, might fall ill." I was slightly startled by her words. It wasn't the usual neighborly concern. There was something implicit, an inquiry, a concern that exceeded boundaries. I just nodded softly, trying to maintain composure. "I have freshly brewed herbal tea," Evelyn continued, stepping a little closer. "Come sit and drink with me to warm up. It's good to have company for tea when it's lonely." That invitation, accompanied by a fond look, made me feel a slight electric current run down my spine. I knew Evelyn was opening a door leading to a world I had never dared to contemplate. My hesitation rose, shyness tried to stop me, but at the same time an intense curiosity. A secret yearning was gradually awakening. It pushed me to step across that boundary. I looked into Evelyn's eyes, which held both loneliness and an unnamed desire. And in that moment, I felt like I was being pulled into an invisible vortex, where reason and emotion were engaged in a fierce battle. Evelyn's tea invitation lingered in my mind for the following days. Her ordinary gestures of concern now seemed to carry a distinctly different nuance. A wave hello when we met on the road, a casual health inquiry, or simply her gaze resting on me a little longer. All were like subtle, gentle signals, yet powerful enough to stir the emotions that had been dormant within me. Once, when I was struggling to fix the broken store sign, Evelyn brought out a cold glass of orange juice. She stood there, her eyes watching me work, occasionally lifting her hand to gently smooth her hair. "Be careful working there, sweetie," she said, her voice slightly trembling. "It would be a shame to fall and get hurt." That concern, the way she looked at me, made my heart beat a little faster. I knew she was trying to get closer, but still maintaining a safe distance. A fragile boundary that both understood, but neither dared to cross. Then one evening, when the sky had turned deep purple, I was sitting alone in my house, hearing melodious music drifting from Evelyn's house. I looked over and saw the dim yellow light emanating from the living room window. Evelyn was sitting there alone. The image of her sitting there lonely in the wide room, with sad music playing, stirred a strange feeling in me. An impulse to go to her side, to share. I got up and strode to her house. The door was unlocked. I gently pushed the door open and stepped in. Evelyn sat there, startled, and turned around. Her eyes widened, clearly surprised, but quickly softened. A strange glint flashing in her gaze, an inexplicable anticipation. "Ethan," she said, her voice slightly hoarse, "why are you here at this hour?" I stood there awkwardly. I heard the music and saw you sitting alone," I stammered. Evelyn smiled, a sad but mysterious smile. "Come in, dear. Sit down here with me." The room carried the faint scent of familiar jasmine, intertwined with something more intense and alluring. The soft light, the melodious music, and Evelyn's presence right next to me. All created an atmosphere that was both peaceful and seductive. We sat there talking casually about life, about small things, but both seemed to feel that something more important was hanging between us, something invisible but heavy. Evelyn's hand lightly brushed mine as she handed me the teacup. A very light touch, but enough to send a shiver down my spine. I turned to look at her and caught her gaze looking at me. In those eyes, I saw not just loneliness, but also a burning yearning, a desire to be fulfilled, to share, that had perhaps been suppressed for too long. I felt my heart ready to leap out of my chest. Reason screamed warnings about the boundary, about the neighborly relationship, about the wrongness. But my body and my soul seemed to be slipping into another current, a stronger, more seductive current. Evelyn's hand gently squeezed mine, and in that clasp I knew we were stepping onto a secret path, a path from which there might be no return. That hand clasp that night at Evelyn's house was like a silent declaration, an acceptance to step across the boundary that both of us had tacitly understood. From that moment, my world seemed to change instantly. In the following days, we no longer tried to hide or avoid the growing attraction between us. Under the scrutinizing eyes of the neighbors, even if only in my imagination, and the indifference of James, our secret relationship gradually blossomed like a wildflower silently reaching out in the darkness. My hands stroked her body, making her tremble. She was both crying and biting her lip, letting me remove each layer of clothing, each curve exposed under the faint light. I kissed her neck, her shoulder, down to her chest, a place she had always hidden out of shyness. "Stop," she sobbed, and as I moved deeper, she burst into tears. But they were tears of happiness. For the first time in her life, she was touched by a man with real love. She wrapped her arms tightly around my neck, whispering through broken breaths, "Don't leave me, please." The initial meetings were still full of awkwardness and hesitation. We usually chose times when no one was around, for instance, when James came back late from his driving route, or when he was deep in his midday nap on the old hammock. I went to her house, or she came to mine. My small house, which usually only had the smell of machine oil and silence, now suddenly became unusually warm whenever she was present. The soft laughter, the warmth of her hand touching my cheek, or her fond gaze at me, all made me feel like I was being warmed by a fire I had never known. The first time we were alone in the small kitchen of my house, the flickering candlelight cast shadows on the familiar objects. The air seemed thick with anticipation and desire. Evelyn moved closer to me, her hands gently caressing my cheek. "Ethan," she called my name. Her voice held the whisper of desire. I don't clearly recall what I did next, only remembering that my body was drawn by an intense pull, overcoming all rational barriers. The first kiss was hesitant at first, then quickly became passionate. All hesitation, every thought of wrongness seemed to vanish in that moment. Only the fusion of two people seeking each other remained. She trembled, both wanting to push away and unable to resist. My hand quickly slid down, pulling her dress high. Her skin was burning hot, her breath ragged. After that night, everything became more natural, more fluid. That period of almost 3 months passed like a dream. We had intimate, close moments at my house, or sometimes at her house, when James was sleeping like a log on the old bed. With each meeting, we felt more confident, more daring. The initial shyness had given way to understanding, to a harmonious rhythm that had become familiar. Evelyn's hand gliding over my skin was no longer hesitant groping, but confident exploration. Her voice, the soft moans, all became familiar, seductive sounds that captivated and immersed me. I began to realize that this relationship wasn't just physical attraction. Some invisible thread was connecting us, an emotional sharing I had never had with anyone. Whenever Evelyn looked at me, her eyes held not only desire, but also fondness, a deep bond. I also realized I started looking forward to our meetings, looking forward to seeing her smile, hearing her voice. Although a slight pang of guilt about morality and society still lurked deep down, when I was with her, I felt fulfilled. I could be myself, no longer lonely in this life. That feeling of guilt was sometimes just a fleeting thought, then submerged again by the intensity of the burning emotions. 3 months passed, and the initial intoxication gradually gave way to something more complex. Whenever James's truck echoed from afar, or when I caught the fleeting, scrutinizing glance of neighbors, a sense of unease crept into me. I began to realize my wrongness, not just morally and socially, but to myself. I was too young, with a long future ahead. Was I trading it for momentary pleasure? These questions kept swirling in my head, sometimes causing me to lose sleep. I started looking at myself in the mirror, seeing an Ethan who was a bit tired, a bit pensive, no longer the innocent young man of days past. Meanwhile, I noticed a distinct change in Evelyn. She spent more time taking care of herself. The silk dresses she used to wear only on special occasions now appeared more frequently. She started wearing makeup. Lipstick, eyeliner, and her silvering hair were meticulously styled. Sometimes a few strands of dyed black hair were added. She became more alluring, more profound, like a flower brightly displaying its colors under the sun after being suppressed for so long. Each time she appeared with this new look, my heart raced, feeling both stirred and a little afraid. Would that beauty be enough to hold me back, or would it only increase the distance between me and the real world? There were late evenings, when James was fast asleep, that Evelyn sat next to me, not seeking physical intimacy, but to share. She told me about her marriage, about the coldness, about the long, drawn-out years without laughter, without sharing. She spoke about James being too focused on his work, too indifferent to his wife's feelings. She felt like a wilting flower in a garden, neither watered nor cared for. I married him because I listened to my family, because I thought it was my duty, she confided, her eyes teary. But life is not just about duty, Ethan. It also needs love, understanding. And it has been too long since I felt those things. Evelyn's confessions made me feel both pity and empathy. I understood her loneliness, And perhaps my initial attraction to her also stemmed from seeing in her the empathy, the yearning for understanding that I was also experiencing. Our relationship seemed to deepen, no longer just a physical exchange, but also an emotional reliance. But at the same time, it made me even more tormented. We were seeking fulfillment for the voids in our souls, but we were walking on a path full of pain and mistakes. The feeling of guilt clung like an invisible ghost, reminding me of the danger of this path. My life in those days was like a small boat drifting between two strong currents. One side was the peace and seduction from Evelyn, where I found sharing, understanding, and moments of euphoria. The other side was the vague call of a normal future, a life I always secretly longed for, where there were no secrets, no taboos. And then Sarah appeared like a strange wind, igniting the flame of hope within me. Sarah was a girl from the next town over. I met her while I was buying parts for the mechanic shop. She worked at a small general store, her smile clear as morning sun, and her eyes sparkled with genuine innocence. We talked, initially just polite exchanges, but gradually I felt drawn to Sarah's simplicity and brightness. She wasn't world-weary or complicated like Evelyn, just a young woman exploring life. When I was with Sarah, I felt like I was returning to my true self, a person unburdened by secrets and guilt. I began to dream of a future with Sarah, of a small family, of peaceful days. I told Evelyn about Sarah. I clearly remember that afternoon, the stifling August heat in New York. The air in her house seemed thick. I spoke cautiously, trying to choose every word to be as gentle as possible. That I had met a girl, that I felt I could have a future with her. I had hoped she would understand, or at least accept. But Evelyn's reaction was completely contrary to what I had anticipated. Her usually gentle face suddenly became cold, her eyes flashed with anger and pain. Future? Evelyn burst into a dry, bitter laugh. You think you have a future with that girl? You think you can leave everything between us to chase an illusion? Evelyn moved closer to me, her voice trembling with anger and despair. Ethan, don't be so naive. You already belong to me. You let me love you. Let me give you everything. You can't just say goodbye. She grabbed my hand, squeezing so hard I felt pain. You're not going anywhere. You belong to me. Do you hear me? I felt suffocated. I looked into her eyes, seeing possession, despair, and fiercely burning jealousy. I realized I had been too naive to think I could easily escape this relationship. Evelyn was not someone who let go easily, and the bond we had created was now seemingly tightening around me. I was trapped between the desire for a clean future and the complex ties of the past. My small room seemed to become suffocatingly cramped. The choked sobs, the muffled crying echoed, merging with the sound of the night rain outside, as if tearing the entire space apart. Evelyn and I, two people torn by mixed emotions, stood facing each other, the final words like knives cutting into each other's hearts. You can't keep me forever, Evelyn, I said, my voice trembling, trying to hold back the tears welling up. Ethan needs his own life. Ethan needs to be loved, to be cared for in the way a young person needs. I looked into her eyes, trying to convey all my sincerity, knowing it would only hurt her more. Evelyn shook her head repeatedly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then what about me? Ethan, what about me? Don't you see how much I love you? You are all I have, the only light in this dark life of mine. Her voice choked with despair. If you leave me, I won't be able to live. Don't say that, Evelyn. I quickly comforted her, moving closer but then stopping, aware of the insurmountable distance between us. You can't live for Ethan. You must live for yourself, for your own life. I looked around the room, which held so many of our memories, both happy and sad, passionate moments and tearful arguments. We were wrong, Evelyn. We went too far, and now we have to stop. Stop! Evelyn burst out laughing through her sobs. Stop for what? So you can go find Sarah? Go build a new life? And what about me? I'll return to an empty house, to James who only knows work, to this loneliness? She pointed at me, her voice full of reproach. "You turned me into a sinner. You dragged me into a forbidden relationship. Now you abandon me." "Ethan is sorry, Evelyn," I repeated. My voice was full of anguish. "Ethan is sorry for everything, but we cannot continue. This will destroy all of us, destroy Ethan's life, and perhaps yours too." I raised my hand to wipe the tears from her cheek. A gesture that had been so familiar now carried a profound sadness. We will never forget each other. These memories, good or bad, will forever be a part of both our lives. Finally, after broken words and fallen tears, we reached a heartbreaking decision together. We would stop, let go, even though our hearts were heavy. Not because the love was gone, but because we knew this love, no matter how intense, could not exist outside the boundaries of law and morality. It had crossed the line, causing indelible harm. The room still lingered with our warmth, but now it carried a bone-chilling coldness. We looked at each other, our eyes filled with regret, sorrow, and also a sense of release. Although this relationship had ended, I knew the memories of Evelyn, of the dreamy months and the moments of realization, would forever haunt my mind. It was a sad chapter, a chapter full of bitter lessons that I would never forget. That night of separation, I stayed awake. The sound of the rain outside seemed to underscore the rambling thoughts about a closed chapter. I knew I needed to move forward, needed to find the path I had lost. That path was clearer now, despite the scars of the past. A few months later, I began to open my heart again. Sarah, the girl from the next town over, had been patiently waiting. I sought her out, no longer the naive, bewildered young man I was before. I had learned how to express my feelings, how to love sincerely and respectfully. We built things up again from scratch with trust and understanding. Sometimes I still felt a little confused when remembering the days gone by. But Sarah was always there with her gentleness and tolerance, helping me dispel the ghosts of the past. Together we learned how to love, how to accept each other's flaws, and build a healthy, proper relationship. I believe that with Sarah, I will find the peace and happiness I always longed for. As for Evelyn, I still occasionally saw her passing outside the alley. She was still the same Evelyn, but in her eyes, the intensity of her yearning seemed to have diminished, replaced by a peacefulness mixed with a touch of nostalgia. Once I caught her gaze looking at me. That look was no longer possessive or jealous, but a gentle smile, a smile that carried acceptance. I think she also found her own path. Maybe she talked to James, or perhaps she learned to find happiness in her own life. Whatever it is, I hope Evelyn finds the peace she deserves. Looking back on the journey, I realize that life is always a series of choices. Some choices lead us to happiness, while others cause us to stumble and pay a heavy price. The relationship with Evelyn, though wrong, taught me a valuable lesson about the complexity of human emotion, about the temptations that can lead us astray, and most importantly, about the unavoidable consequences of actions that cross the line. It reminded me of the value of honesty, of respect, and of seeking happiness in the right, constructive way. The memories of Evelyn are still there, like a faint scar on my heart. It no longer hurts, but serves as a constant reminder of a chapter that has passed. I know the past cannot be erased, but it cannot dictate the future either. I learned to forgive myself, accept my mistakes, and move forward with a more open heart, a deeper perspective on life. And I believe the lesson from that forbidden relationship will help me become a better man. One who knows how to love and cherish what he has, so as never to regret the paths he has taken.